Thanks, Joe.
Hello, Prospect Theater Project supporters. We are live here with an Iliad Talk-back with Jack Souza, the director and speaker of the whole Jack Souza. We have Mark Reynolds, the cinematographer and director, and David Egan, composer for an Iliad. I want to thank you all for coming. We're going to let everybody feed in for the next minute or so that we can have a good audience to do this talk-back. We're going to start off the questions momentarily. Everybody hang tight. We're going to do a quick audience which everyone at home can hear. Jack, would you mind grabbing the microphone real quick?
Check.
Okay. I'm going to kick off instruction really quickly. Our first question goes towards Mr. Reynolds. So, would you mind talking a little bit about the production setup you had for Iliad and the things that went into the production process?
Yes, so my brother, Greg, and I were the directors, Greg cinematographer, and me running the second camera. We worked with, we have two Blackmagic cinema cameras, and we had one camera there, one camera there. Jack largely worked within the space of where we saw the show. The center of the show was where we run this. The table and chair were right here. There were moments, where Jack had to swing around the table, but he largely stayed here. So Greg and I, we tried to cover it shooting wide, medium, and close-up, and that was mostly, keeping the cameras on sticks, on tripods. And we had a lavalier mic that we had right here that I don't think anyone was able to see. But we did have issues later with that mic, which I'll get into that later. We ended up doing, there's 7 scenes in the show. And we chose to do we went 2 scenes on Saturday, we shot 3 scenes on Sunday, and then 2 scenes on Monday, that's right. So we had 2. Yeah. And we spent probably 4 or 5 hours shooting each scene. And we took a break in between. And what made it tricky is, we could have kept covering it. We took generally about 2 passes. We get masters from both cameras. And then we would change the lenses and we would go like medium or maybe close-up. But we had to be careful. And like I said, we could have kept shooting, but we had such a limited amount of time that when it came down to editing this thing, it wasn't just shooting a performance. We shot it like a film. We had to be careful. We had enough time to edit it together. And we found that in post-production, we were like, wow, this is going to be a little tougher than we thought. Because production went really smooth. Luckily, Jack, he was well rehearsed, but not only was he well rehearsed, he was very consistent in his dialogue, but also in his actions. You've got to think in terms of, let's say he says something and his arm is up like this, and then we may have a cutting point where his arm has to be up here. But if his arm is down here, not here, then it makes it really challenging to match within those edit points. So it ended up becoming really challenging during post-production. Unfortunately, not all of our choices were made just creatively, because we have a really good Sennheiser monitor light. It's a good setup. We've been using it for years. But that day, we had it just kept popping up through the whole shoot. That's the mic we dropped, and we dropped sound drops. And then also we would get these pops, these little like pins, these little pops. And luckily my brother's an excellent editor. And these are things that we would actually have a sound mixer fix. So we didn't have the time or the money, so we ended up having to do it ourselves. So what Greg would do, like let's say there was a line that was run. Here's the word was run. We would go through and find a good clean tape of Jack saying run, and then Greg would take that little line, copy and paste it, where what Jack was saying it within the finished, the hero edit, and you would have to match it. And usually it worked, and we got away with it. There's a lot more challenges that I think we're going to end up talking about throughout this process. I don't want to. I could literally take this mic and not give anyone to the next hour. So I'm going to not be that long. Give you the opportunity to ask some more questions. But I do have a lot more to say about this. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, you guys essentially shot a feature film in a few days with editing and everything. That's no easy undertaking. To pass the mic, let's shoot over to Jack. And I apologize for having a little bit of audio difficulty with our audience, so we may repeat some questions throughout the production, throughout the talk back. But Jack, this is a large role, a large undertaking for any actor, and you've done, a lot of really iconic roles. How did you prepare for this one in particular?
In a way, I didn't get to prepare for it. As this was originally scheduled, I mean, here's what I should say is that my prep was largely as a director. I've been preparing since June, as a director. And I didn't intend to be in the play. I was going to be on the other side. But things changed. Things changed. And I ended up doing the role. So, just a lot of my mental prep on how to move through the story was done not as an actor but as a director. And I think in another sense, an actor is going to take to this role really naturally. It's easy to understand yourself not as a character other than you, but yourself as a storyteller. I mean, this is the heart of all theater. This is the heart of what we're ever doing here is telling stories. So, finding myself as a storyteller who was weary of telling this particular story was not, it's not a great stretch. It was very accessible. And I chose to make my character kind of pudgy and old. And that worked well with the tools I had to work with. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's hop over to the side of the aisle to David. Mr. Dickinson was the composer for Iliad, as well as many other Prospect Theater project productions: Seafarer, Faith Healer, Galileo, Bits of Wrath,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
To Kill a Mockingbird, Richard II. What is your process when you're dealt with a play, you're given a play to compose for? What's the production process for you on your end?
Sure. So the first thing is, I'm lucky because I've exclusively worked for Jack as the director. And so the first point is, what does the director want? What's the director's vision? What's the director's vision? And then from there, you sketch out the direction you're going to go into. And in this specific case, Jack said that you might want to look at Max Richter, David Byrne, Brian Eno. And then he said, I'm interested in a cello, I'm interested in a primitive flute, I'm interested in a didgeridoo. And then I look at what the productions, the way they've been done in the past. In this specific case, it's a one-person show. They have a live cellist on stage, and I wasn't a fan of that. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was very non-emotional. I don't think that there was a connection that I saw in anything that I saw online. So then Jack and I have a conversation about what's his vision based on those instruments, and then I do some musical research, and I just kind of flew past all the people he mentioned in this specific case. In my personal world, I'm into Stephen Reich right now. He's a great journalist, a composer, and I used him for inspiration. And then I wanted to make sounds that were to a degree non-traditional. So there's a string sound through that. It's a very distorted cello sound. And then there's a lot of didgeridoo through that. And those are those long, ominous sounds. And then there's the primitive flute. And I wanted that to be as rustic as possible. And then next, it's picking the places where we think music should be. And that's just an ongoing conversation. What's different about this is that Jack and I, the show will be open. We keep working on musical pieces. That's not unusual for us at all. We work to the very end because it's an ongoing live piece of work. It's always changing. In this case, it's a hybrid because it was being filmed, so that's a uniquely different process for us. Usually in film, the music comes at the end, and in this case, the music was there at the beginning and all the way through the process. And then there were times when Jack would change. Because we didn't have a traditional rehearsal process, there was, they would send me sequences of speeches, and I would write to the speeches, and we just have this instinct of us going back and forth for 10 plus years that we don't have to talk about it a lot. We just kind of know what direction we're going in. And frankly, I missed 2 or 3 places, and Jack would come back and go, no, if there are 3 emotions you're trying to tell in this one speech, like we go from a flute to an ominous to then the cello being very dissonant, and he has to become 3 different flavors of emotions during that speech. He would, and that's all in a 45 seconds. So kind of a big ask. Then he would go, no, you need to make, rework it this way and rework it that way. And that's our whole process. It's constantly moving and changing, and nothing is permanent. It really isn't. And if Mark or Greg had an input in one, they suggested at one point that you need to put a speech, you need to put music underneath all the listing of wars. And that turned out to be my favorite cue, and that came from Mark and Greg. So it's just a constantly moving ball you're playing with.
Okay. I want to ask our panelists just to up their volume a little bit when they talk. And as we continue, I have a question for all of you. This is one of the oldest stories in the world, and I think that the authors did a really wonderful job making it relevant today. But in your view, how do you see this play being important for today's audience?
Well, I really feel it's about the horror of the war. And when we were in, I guess we would have to call it pre-development, pre-production, we really, because this really is a hybrid piece. It's cinema and it's theater. And Greg and I didn't exact to it. We didn't just want to, and it can be perfectly fine to just shoot a performance, and it can be great. But we definitely want to make it more cinematic. And there's some moments that we'll talk about. The one I want to talk about right now that's related to the question is that video sequence. And whoever's seen, I'm assuming everyone's seen the show, it's about 5 minutes of the poet listing the horrible wars he has envisioned over the last 100,000 years. And they don't stop. And they just keep coming. They're relentless. So we collaborated and decided, let's bring in another element. Let's get some images of not just war, just the menacing horror of humanity. And Molly Souza, put together a slideshow that we shot against that back wall. And it was a really, really powerful moment because it was nice because you had all the elements coming together. You had the score, you had Jack's performance, you had cinema, the sound, and everything. And I think and the images were just so stark and ugly, and really it expressed that. Now, as Americans, we don't see that much of the horror of war. We haven't had that much happen here on our own soil, other than, I mean, really, we suffer more from American terrorism than international terrorism. You know, a lot of it comes from the enemies within our country. But the story is about them too, you know, because that is, when you could look at that as civil war, and that is part of the story. So I'm just really, really glad and really proud that that piece came together, because in a way it's the most important. There are several important parts of it to me, but that moment, that scene, that sequence, really does it express that major theme of this disgusting, horrible aspect of war. Really just shows like just that terrible part of humanity that, as human beings, lives within, I know not all of us in particular, but it's kind of part of human nature. And I think that's part of the show and why the poet is so weary of telling the story over and over again.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And it's a good question. It's, I fundamentally believe that people have not changed through time. That we're essentially the same people we have always been. And the only thing that really has changed are the tools we have to deal with our circumstances. I mean, our needs, our desires are, are essentially the same ones that we had 2,500 years ago. The shelter, food, if we're lucky, love, just some really basic drives. But what has changed over time, what's grown more sophisticated, is the tools we have to achieve those goals or to deal with the impossibility of achieving those goals. The play really serves to remind us of I think, an essential continuity. From now reaching clear back to when this story was being told by storytellers before Homer even wrote it down. But I also think that Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hare, are structurally focused on making that relevance more accessible. By the failure of the muses to help him at the beginning of the play. He's struggling with it, and he naturally finds himself trying to put the story into a context which is more understandable, which is more current. Relating it to a grocery store, relating it to traffic, relating it to the world we live in, and that really lovely speech about where all of those Greek soldiers came from. Anytime I look back at these old stories, these stories from antiquity, I trust that storytelling is going to be effective because we're essentially the same people that were sitting and hearing those stories when they were told for the first time. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
So when I was watching the show, I was watching this at home, streaming it with my wife and my mother-in-law, and we took a break, and and then it goes to CNN, and on CNN, it just killed a nuclear physicist in Iran, a bomb, and the election is still being considered a fake election. And when you drill down past the wars, you're talking about people in power.
Yes.
And here we are, 2021, and that's what's going on presently. Pertaining to the sequence, the 5-minute sequence, when you use it for a show, you could, they talk about the wars, so theoretically, you could have a bunch of bombast in there, because wars are bombast. Or you can go into what are the effects of wars on people, and then emotionally try to empathize with what those people are going through emotionally. Jack speaks in the show about people and their families and their children and wanting to be with them instead of having to be on the fields. And they could come home from war and their wife could be gone, could be dead, could have 3 more children. And these are the real concerns of these human beings. And so you try to write to that. In this specific sequence, there's a great piece by Mark Hudson called On the Threshold of Liberty. I suggest everybody listen to it. It's on paper drawings. But the point, if you listen to that music again, and you can because it's streaming on the Prospect Theater Project website, is that it starts with a simple, forlorn, sadness, melancholic moment, and then it starts to build, and it takes off, and then there's a steady rhythm to it, and then it goes right back to the beginning. So with Lord, where it begins is where it ends, where it begins. And that was in terms of how you transition into a piece to tell the story of Jack mentioning all the wars. That's how that occurred.
There's one more thing I want to say about that. Jack and I talked about this a lot. And it's the fact within human nature, and it's a big theme in this show, is the poet has grown weary of telling the story because people don't hear it anymore. Yeah. They don't really listen. And you brought up empathy. And is it that have we, because, and I'm talking really more to Americans, have we lost that ability to have empathy because we don't necessarily see it firsthand? We see it happen in other places. Yeah. You know, and I think it's different to see it on TV, even the most horrific images. But because they're not right in the face, I think human beings have a tendency to turn off because it's too painful. But if the block is blown up and you lose 8 neighbors and 2 of them are kids and you knew all of them, some of them maybe between names for life, some people just were killed, it would be right there in the face. And you would have a whole different experience to what war is really about. And I think Jack did carry that he really stressed out well, that wariness that this poet, this character, like, why am I telling this story anymore if no one is going to bother to listen? And no one is going to bother to change because we just keep having war after war after war. And they're still going to be war.
We have some questions from the audience as well. From Gary Thomas. That's a question for Jack. How did you approach the poet's failing memory?
Well, you know, again, coincidentally, the given circumstances of the character were precisely mirroring the given circumstances of the actor playing the character. Right, that's all I mean. I don't mean to sound glib, but, yeah, I mean, there's a hard reality.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah. This is from Mimi and Larry. Is it possible that you continue small online productions such as this one beyond COVID?
I can see that, sure, yes, I can see that happening, but I certainly don't, I long to return to the, community of theater and the ability to actually commune in a shared space, in a shared space. That's the soul of theater, and that's, what makes it different from film, essentially, and television. I mean, it's not all content; it is proximity. So yeah, I mean, I could see like radio shows and play reading projects. I could see those certainly being applied. The screening element being applied to those beyond COVID. Just because it is so nice to give the opportunity to reach a much larger audience. We had people from Sacramento and from the Bay Area, communities other than ours that were able to see up in Tahoe Arena also. Were able to see the production and couldn't make it down here, and that's wonderful. But a steady diet of this, I long for an artistic family convening in a single place.
We have a question from the audience. This one is from John Miles. The Richard Whitmore translation that I read in the 70s did not have Achilles as being in love or necessarily sleeping with. What to interpret as being Achilles' lover, and that Achilles was basically sold.
Wait,
We'll move on to the next question. Jack, why do you see the muses as non-responsive to the poet's request?
I think because the poet was not sticking with the program. I think in a way it's because the poet himself was growing weary of telling the story. I think the muses were withholding. And yeah, I think the muses were withholding until he kind of started to break through and understood for himself why he was telling this story again. And then the muses, really another character in the play, arrive and start lending their support.
This is a question for all three of you. What were some of the production advantages and disadvantages to working in this hybrid theater film world?
Well, it was great. We've done, I think this is our fourth project we've done with Jack, so we have a really good chemistry with Jack. It was nice. I mean, essentially, this is working on stage. We did occasionally have some motorcycles or big trucks going by or whatever sound issue, but that wasn't too bad. But yeah, it was nice not being outside on location, being basically on set. So it is the power to do really kind of whatever we wanted to do, whatever we needed to do. Although there were challenges because we had to work so fast. It wasn't just camera and picture. It was all of us that had such a short amount of time to prepare. So pre-production, Jack was building sets days before. The lighting cues, everything. I mean, the lights weren't totally ready to go till the night before. So normally we would have at least a day or so to kind of check exposure, and because there was a lot of different lighting cues. So we were by every single day, trying to meet the challenge of exposure changes, and that affected us in post production as well. Where at one point, I think for some scenes, we chose to keep the camera on this side because we like the exposure better on this side, thematically it better with that scene. So, I mean, there was advantages, but there was definitely challenges. For us, this was probably, I think, from beginning to end, like Jack talking about doing it, and just spending probably a good week kind of talking through, for us, we skipped over and then we're coming up with cinematic ideas, trying to come up with, a logical way to do it that would be successful, but also usable. But 3 months would have been really, really nice. We could have done a much better job. We did a damn good job with 40 days, but that was the time constraint that made it very, very difficult.
Well, there's two parts to me, but just a real simple thing. Usually I would be in a rehearsal process and working with Jack, and we would be trying music out to see if it fit or not. But in this case, I had all the cues and I would listen to them in a computer as they were filming, and then as Jack was doing his speech, I would kind of figure out whether the cue worked or not. But that's not the real point. The real point is that the intensity of what the show was. Imagine Jack here, 5 hours, no break, doing each scene 3 times. Imagine that for 5 hours. It was an incredible show. It was an incredible show of strength, of great acting, of great discipline by everybody involved. And I don't think I've ever really seen that. And he did that 3 days in a row on a one-person show. That is amazing.
Yeah, if there were 2, 3, 4 actors, and the amount of time we had to do it, I don't know if we definitely would have gotten it done. We wouldn't have been able to shoot like a movie. We would have had to really simplify things.
The next question, we're all in this world of COVID. What are you doing to stay creative during these unprecedented times?
I'm glad I was speaking. I have a couple active projects, and being a writer, a director, being in the office all the time is like where I live anyways. So I got even more done. I worked out even harder. I got healthier through COVID, and I'm a glass half full person, and I really try to find the silver lining in things. And even this I know people want to see live theater, but this is a pretty amazing little production that wouldn't have happened if we weren't living in this time of COVID.
Yeah, we ended up having to close our doors in March in the middle of a production. And even at that time, I said, well, a month and a half, we're going to be back on our feet and going again. But that didn't turn out. And we lost 2 productions last season, at the end of last season, 2.5 productions last season. So rolling into our 20th year, I was just really determined that we would be presenting work here. So, I stayed focused. Finally, like by June, I was really focused on building the new season, and then executing the new season. And I also am able to teach theater. So there's a modicum of creativity that gets exercised pretty regularly in this time and just making those things happen.
times I've written some music for commercials, but that really is just an aside. You know, I was really lucky, and Jack and I talk about this a lot, is that when I was a young kid, I was like in third, fourth grade, and my brother brought home the Beatles album, and I went, that's it, I got it, I know what I'm doing the rest of my life, I'm complete. and since that moment, and you'd have to talk to my wife about this, but I have lived in a world that's all musical all the time, and it never changes. And I'm like a baseball player, always in training. And I'm always working on a project, I'm always thinking about a project, I'm always practicing, because you never know what's going to come in front of you next, and that's the beauty of it.
Beautifully said. Jack, how does an Iliad fit within the theme of the season?
So angry. Why are you so angry about that?
Tense question.
I think the season, I mean, in a number of ways. Thematically, the season is really about, first of all, coping with adversity, and secondarily about some of the consequences of having to cope with adversity, and even the consequences of some of those coping mechanisms. That was easy. I knew at the beginning of the season that as I was making those choices, I was reading plays, I knew that I wanted those first couple plays to be very small tasks. And that just, very naturally set my mind on a path towards the origins of theater as storytelling. That's, as complex and grand and as theater can be now. Its roots are, a single storyteller at a fireplace telling a story with inherent meaning. I was aware of Dennis O'Hare and Peterson's Iliad. In fact, I saw it at Berkeley Rep a couple of years ago, several years ago. So I kind of went to that and just realized how well it fit in with all of the criteria that I was sort of laying out for what plays I wanted to look at for this year.
In closing, what projects are you looking forward to working on next? What's next on your guys' chopping block?
My next project is, I've got the radio cavalcade I'm working on with Michael, which we're going to capture in a couple days. So I've been working on that. I've been working on another project for the play reading project. Although circumstances have changed with that production. And I'm working on UGA UNESCO's Rhinoceros, which is the next show here. And I've also kind of got my mind on the play I'm going to be directing down at Cal State San Jose.
Okay.
It's changing. COVID, you just got to be fluid. It's changing. So I actually can't say that.
Okay. Art?
Right now, I'm in the thick of editing a feature-length documentary about America's first straight pride parade, which happened here in Vanessa a couple of years ago. So it's about everything leading up to the event, how it affected the community, really goes deep into the themes of freedom of speech, crossing the line over into hate speech. So I've been on that project about a year and a half, have at least another solid year and a half until that project is completed. And then my brother and I just signed on as producers on a feature film that we can't just say quite yet what it is. It's going to be a really, really good piece if it gets completed, which is really exciting.
I'm in conversation with one of your great fellow actresses here, Laura Dickinson Turner. I did a show a couple of years ago called The curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. I did it for a Pat Rep in Carmel, Professional Retail Theater over there. And I created this whole electronic dance music world. And I kind of liked it. And then I listened to the Chills channel on Sirius. And I got to work with Laura on a piece a couple of years ago, and her voice is out of this world. Fantastic. One take. She can do miraculous things with her voice. And I want to try to create some pop songs, or not necessarily pop songs, but we're working on a world where her voice and my music can take place. And the other thing I'm really working on is I've gone crazy for gypsy jazz, and it has changed my life. And so I'm a guitarist also, mostly more of a guitarist than composer. And so I'm in the middle of everything Django Reinhardt and Danny Robbie Nolan, and it's just a great world. And be aware that the greatest guitarist of all time played with 3 fingers. That's how he fretted, because he lost 2 of his fingers in a fire based on a candle burning down the caravan he was sleeping in. And he has defined and invented all jazz chording, and he did it with 3 chords. It's Django Reinhardt. Check him out.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panelists today for stopping by. I want to thank all of you for your questions. Don't forget, you still have till the end of tonight to watch an Iliad, and stay tuned for the radio